At my engagement party, my parents announced they were giving my wedding fund to my sister because she needed it more. So I laughed and said the money belonged only to me, but they replied we'll meet in court. I couldn't stop smiling as I looked around the restaurant. Everything was perfect. The decorations, the food, the music. After 3 years of dating Dan, we were finally engaged, and tonight was our engagement party. In just 3 months, we'd be married. My name is Jenna, 28 years old, marketing executive at Collins & Bright. I met Dan at work 3 years ago when he joined our IT department. We hit it off immediately during a company retreat, and the rest was history. Tonight, we were surrounded by our closest friends and family to celebrate our upcoming wedding. Well, most of my family anyway. My parents, Robert and Linda Carter, were here with forced smiles. My younger sister Maya was here too, looking bored as usual. She was texting someone on her new iPhone, probably the third one she'd bought this year after breaking or losing the previous ones. We'd never been particularly close, and our relationship only grew more strained as we got older. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" My mother tapped her glass with a spoon, and the room quieted down. "First, I want to congratulate my beautiful daughter Jenna and her wonderful fiancé Dan. May your marriage be filled with love and happiness." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. I smiled at Dan, squeezing his hand under the table. "I also have an important announcement to make," my mother continued, and something in her tone made my smile falter. "After discussing this with Robert, we've decided that we're going to give Jenna's wedding fund to Maya." The room went silent. I laughed, thinking it was some strange joke. "That's funny, Mom, but that money is mine, and I'm not giving it to anyone." My mother's face hardened. "This isn't a joke, Jenna. Your sister is getting married a few months after you, and she needs the money more than you do." I felt my cheeks grow hot. "What are you talking about? That's my money." "Honey, you earn good money, and Dan is well off. Maya and her fiancé don't have much. She deserves to have the wedding of her dreams too." "Are you serious right now?" I stood up, my hands shaking. "That fund is in my personal account. You can't just decide to give it to Maya." Maya jumped up, nearly knocking over her chair. "Don't be so greedy, Jenna. You could have offered to share with me a long time ago. You know I need it more than you. We're using that money for our wedding and as a down payment on a mortgage," I said firmly. "Dan and I are planning a modest ceremony. We're being practical." "Your sister lives modestly," my mother shouted. "Her salary is small, her fiancé doesn't earn much, and she deserves to have her dream wedding." "You can tell me whatever you want," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm not giving you my money." My mother's face turned red. "Then we'll see you in court," she spat. She grabbed her purse, and my father and Maya followed her out of the restaurant. My mind traveled back to when I was 16 and Maya was 13. My parents had opened those personal funds for us, telling us we could access the money when we turned 18 and use it for whatever we needed. When I turned 18, I enrolled in a public state college with a partial scholarship. I worked hard in high school, and my good grades paid off. I was careful with the fund money, using only what I needed for tuition and saving the rest. The account even grew with interest over time. I'd always been the responsible one, planning ahead and thinking about my future. Maya, on the other hand, chose an expensive private college when her time came. I remember the day she announced it at dinner. "I got into Princeton," she'd squealed, waving the acceptance letter. My parents had beamed with pride. "We're so proud of you, sweetie," Mom had said. "Use your fund however you need." Maya never cared much for studying, though. She spent most of her time partying and shopping. 2 years later, she dropped out, having already spent a significant chunk of her fund on tuition and her lavish lifestyle. I remember the call I got from her. "College is such a waste of time," she'd said casually. "I've got a business idea that's going to make me rich anyway." That business idea was an online boutique selling overpriced yoga wear that she'd designed herself, despite having no design experience. She blew through the remainder of her fund renting a fancy storefront, hiring a professional photographer for product shoots, and throwing a lavish launch party with champagne and celebrity guests she'd paid to attend. The business failed within 6 months. She hadn't bothered to research the market or create a business plan. All she had to show for her fund was a fancy car she'd bought on a whim during the brief period when she thought her business was going to take off. "At least I got this sweet ride out of it," she'd said when I expressed concern about her financial situation. "Stop worrying so much. Something will work out." That had always been Maya's approach to life. Act now, worry later. Or rather, let others worry for her. Meanwhile, I'd graduated, landed a great job at Collins & Bright, climbed the corporate ladder, and met Dan. Life was good, and I was planning my future carefully. I'd saved most of my fund, watching it grow with interest. Dan and I had talked extensively about using it for our modest wedding and putting the rest toward a down payment on our first home. Maya had recently started dating a guy named Tyler who worked at a cell phone store. After just 6 months together, they'd gotten engaged too. They were planning to get married a few months after Dan and me. I've been happy for her, even though I barely knew Tyler, but I never imagined she'd try to take my money for her wedding. As I finally fell asleep that night after our disastrous engagement party, I dismissed my parents' threat. The law was on my side. They couldn't possibly take my money away from me. I had no idea how wrong I was. For the first few days after the disastrous engagement party, my phone kept buzzing with notifications. My parents had launched a full-scale attack. Calls, texts, and voicemails, all saying the same thing. I had betrayed my family. I was selfish, ungrateful, and I would regret my decision. 2 weeks after the engagement party fiasco, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. My stomach dropped when I saw it was from a law firm, Patterson, Weber, and Associates. Inside was a statement of claim from my parents. "They actually did it," I whispered, sinking onto the couch. "They're really suing me." Later that same day, I received an email from a lawyer named James Weber, offering a meeting for a pretrial settlement. I was curious about what possible legal argument my parents thought they had, so I agreed to the meeting. The next day, I sat across from my parents and their lawyer in a sterile conference room. My mother wouldn't look me in the eye, and my father's face was set in a grim line. "Let me be clear," I said, addressing the lawyer directly. "I have documentation showing that I am the sole owner of this money. The fund was created for me when I was 16, and I gained full control when I turned 18. There's no legal basis for this claim." The lawyer, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and thick glasses, cleared his throat. "Your parents contend that there was a verbal agreement that the funds were exclusively for college education." I laughed in disbelief. "That's not true. There was never any restriction on how the money could be used. Your mother tells me that you misled them," the lawyer continued. "They didn't fully understand what they were doing when they issued this fund to you." "That's ridiculous. They created identical funds for both Maya and me. How could they not understand what they were doing?" My mother finally spoke up, her voice cold. "The verbal agreement was that the money was for college tuition only. You violated our agreement by only using a small portion for your education. You have absolutely no evidence that the money was restricted to college expenses," I said, trying to stay calm. "You divided the money equally between Maya and me. The only difference is that I was responsible with mine, while she wasted hers." "We're not here to debate each other's flaws," the lawyer interjected smoothly. "We're here to discuss a settlement." "There will be no settlement," I said firmly. "That money is legally mine, and I intend to use it for my wedding and mortgage down payment as planned." My mother's face twisted with anger. "Then I'll see you in court." Over the next few months, the legal battle consumed my life. I hired a good lawyer, Emily Ramirez, who assured me that the case was straightforward. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," she told me after reviewing all my documents. "The money was clearly gifted to you with no strings attached. Their claim about a verbal agreement restricting the use to college expenses won't hold up without evidence." "Then why is their lawyer letting them pursue this?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Aren't they just wasting money on legal fees they'll never get back?" Emily shrugged. "Sometimes people pursue cases they can't win because emotions are running high. The lawyer probably advised against it, but they insisted." The case dragged on for months. There were depositions, hearings, and mountains of paperwork. Every time I saw my parents in court, they looked at me like I was a stranger. Maya came to some of the hearings too, sitting behind our parents with a smug look that made my blood boil. During one particularly tense hearing, Maya took the stand and claimed that our parents had always made it clear the money was only for education. "Did you use all of your fund for education?" my lawyer asked her during cross-examination. Maya shifted uncomfortably. "Well, not all of it. In fact, you dropped out of college after 2 years, correct? And then used the remainder of your fund to start a business and buy a car?" "That's not relevant," Maya snapped. "It's entirely relevant," my lawyer pressed. "If the funds were truly only meant for education, why were you allowed to use yours for a business venture and a personal vehicle?" Maya had no good answer for that. Throughout this ordeal, Dan was my rock. He came to every hearing, held me when I cried from frustration, and never once suggested that I give him just to make it all go away. The whole situation was taking a toll on me. I was spending thousands on legal fees, and the stress was affecting my work and our wedding plans. What should have been one of the happiest times of my life had turned into a nightmare. As the final court date approached, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister. "Jenna, honey, I want you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with what your parents are doing," she said. "This whole thing is ridiculous. You worked hard and saved your money. Maya spent hers foolishly, and now your parents want to bail her out at your expense." Her support meant more to me than I could express. "Thanks, Aunt Susan. It's been really hard." "I know, sweetie. And there's something else you should know. Your mother has been telling people that you're being selfish and cruel to your sister. She's trying to turn the family against you. I felt a fresh wave of hurt. Why would she do that? Your mother has always had a blind spot when it comes to Maya, Aunt Susan said gently. She coddles her, makes excuses for her. I love your sister, but she's never had to face the consequences of her actions because your parents always bail her out. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a long time, thinking about what Aunt Susan had said. She was right. My parents had always treated Maya differently. When we were kids, Maya could talk her way out of any punishment, while I was held to a higher standard. As adults, they celebrated her smallest achievements while taking my successes for granted. The day of the final court hearing arrived. I sat beside my lawyer, watching as the judge reviewed all the evidence one last time. My parents and Maya sat at the other table, all three of them avoiding my gaze. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. Having reviewed all the evidence presented, I find no basis for the plaintiff's claim that the funds in question were restricted to educational purposes only. The documentation clearly shows that the defendant, Jenna Carter, is the sole legal owner of the account in question and has full rights to use the funds as she sees fit. Relief washed over me. I'd won, just as Emily had predicted I would. But as I looked across at my parents' angry faces and Maya's tearful glare, I knew that while I'd won the legal battle, I'd lost my family in the process. Outside the courthouse, my mother wouldn't even look at me. My father put his arm around Maya, who was dramatically sobbing into a tissue. I hope you're happy now, he said coldly as they walked past me. I wasn't happy. I'd spent thousands on legal fees, endured months of stress, and for what? To prove I was right. The victory felt hollow. The weeks following the court victory were surprisingly quiet. No angry calls, no nasty texts, no family members reaching out to berate me for being selfish. The silence was almost more unnerving than the conflict had been. I did send invitations to my parents and Maya, but I wasn't surprised when they didn't RSVP. What did surprise me was what happened next. It started with a phone call from my cousin Ryan. Hey, Jenna, I just wanted to check in about your wedding. I'm really sorry about you and Dan broke up. My stomach dropped. Ryan, what are you talking about? Dan and I are fine. The wedding is still happening. But your mom called last week and said you canceled everything because Dan cheated on you. Over the next hour, my phone blew up as I received call after call from invited guests asking what had happened and why the wedding was suddenly canceled. Apparently, my mother had been busy spreading lies to everyone on our guest list. Someone even sent out emails from your address saying the wedding was off, my cousin told me. I got one last Thursday. I immediately checked my sent emails, but there was nothing. Someone had created a fake account in my name. My hands shaking with anger, I called my Aunt Susan, who always knew everything happening in the family. Oh, honey, I was going to call you, she said when she answered. Your mother has been telling everyone that you and Dan broke up because he cheated on you. She's saying you're too embarrassed to tell anyone yourself. I felt sick. My own mother and sister were trying to sabotage my wedding by spreading vicious lies about Dan and sending fake cancellation notices to our guests. I spent the entire day calling every person on our guest list, explaining that the wedding was absolutely still happening and that the cancellation emails were fake. Most people were understanding, though confused about why my own family would do such a thing. Because they're bitter about losing the court case, I explained over and over. They wanted me to give my wedding fund to my sister for her wedding. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. 3 days later, Dan stormed into our apartment, his face pale. My parents just called. Your sister contacted them. She told them she had proof that you were cheating on me. When they didn't believe her, she sent them photos. Photos of what? I've never cheated on you. Dan pulled out his phone and showed me several images. I couldn't help but laugh despite the seriousness of the situation. They were clearly amateur Photoshop jobs. Pictures of a woman with my face awkwardly pasted onto her head, standing close to some random man. Did your parents actually believe this? I asked incredulously. Of course not. They said the photos were so badly edited even a child could tell they were fake. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. But they're worried about what else your family might try to pull. They suggested we hire security for the wedding. It was a good suggestion. The last thing I wanted was my family showing up and causing a scene on our wedding day. We contacted a security company that specialized in event security and hired 2 guards to watch the entrance. We'll need photos of the people you want to keep out, the security manager told us. It felt surreal emailing them pictures of my own parents and sister, but after everything they'd done, I couldn't risk having them at my wedding. As our wedding day approached, I tried to focus on the positive. Despite my family's attempts to sabotage us, nearly all our guests had confirmed they were still coming. Dan and I had found a beautiful venue within our budget, and everything was set for our modest but elegant ceremony. The night before the wedding, I had a moment of sadness thinking about how my father wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. Instead, my uncle Robert, my dad's brother who had sided with me through this whole ordeal, would be doing the honors. On the morning of our wedding day, I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. What if my family tried something else? What if they found a way past security? The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. By 1:30, guests were arriving and being seated in the garden where we'd set up rows of white chairs facing an arch covered in flowers. I peeked out the window of the bridal suite, watching as our friends and extended family gathered. At 1:45, one of the security guards knocked on the door of the bridal suite. "Miss Carter, I thought you should know we just detained a young woman trying to sneak in through the back entrance. She matches the photo you provided of your sister." My heart raced. Was she alone? Yes, but she was carrying a can of red paint. "We have her detained in the security office." I felt a surge of anger. Red paint? Maya had been planning to ruin my wedding dress, or maybe dump paint all over the ceremony space. The thought of her malice made me feel physically ill. "Do you want to press charges?" the guard asked. "We can call the police." I considered it for a moment. Maya deserved to face consequences for once in her life. But then I thought about what that would mean. Police at my wedding, a statement to file, possibly having to go to court again. "No," I said finally, "just make sure she doesn't get in. And check if my parents are trying to get in too." The guard nodded and left. I sat down heavily, my wedding dress rustling around me. "Are you okay?" my friend Tara asked, kneeling beside me. "My own sister just tried to ruin my wedding with a can of paint," I said, my voice hollow. "How am I supposed to be okay with that?" "By not letting her win," Tara said firmly. "You're about to marry an amazing man who loves you. You have friends and family here who support you. Don't let your sister's bitterness ruin this day." She was right. I took a deep breath, fixed my makeup where a few tears had smudged it, and stood up. "Let's do this," I said. The ceremony was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle on my uncle's arm, I saw Dan waiting for me under the flower arch, his face lighting up when he saw me. In that moment, all the drama with my family faded away. This was our day, and nothing could ruin it. We exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through good times and bad. When Dan slipped the ring on my finger and the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, I felt a wave of pure happiness. The reception was everything we'd hoped for. Good food, great music, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. Several guests commented on how lovely everything was despite the unfortunate circumstances, clearly referring to the drama with my family. As the night wound Dan and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, I couldn't help but wonder what my sister had been thinking, showing up with paint to sabotage my wedding. How had our relationship deteriorated to this point? Had she always resented me this much? I pushed the thoughts aside as Dan and I ran through a shower of rice to our waiting car. This was the start of our new life together, and I refused to let my family's bitterness cast a shadow over it. Our honeymoon was exactly what we needed. 2 weeks on a beach far away from family drama. When we returned, I was determined to put the whole ordeal behind me and focus on building our life together. A month after our wedding, I ran into my cousin Jackie at the grocery store. "Did you hear about Maya's wedding?" she asked. I shook my head. "We're not exactly on speaking terms. Your parents took out a huge loan to fund it. It's going to be at the Grand Hotel downtown, super lavish. They're flying in a chef from New York, hired a string quartet, the works." I couldn't help but laugh. Of course they were going all out for Maya's big day, even if it meant going into debt. "Are you going to go if she invites you?" Jackie asked. "After she tried to ruin my wedding with a can of paint? Not a chance." No invitation ever came, which was fine by me. Through the family grapevine, I heard that many relatives had declined to attend Maya's wedding, uncomfortable with how my parents and sister had treated me. Life moved on. Dan and I used my wedding fund exactly as planned. We had our modest wedding and put the rest toward a down payment on a beautiful apartment. With our combined incomes, the mortgage was manageable, and we were building equity instead of throwing away money on rent. I sometimes thought about reaching out to my parents, especially around the holidays or my birthday when their absence felt most noticeable. But then I'd remember the look on my mother's face in court, or the fact that my sister had tried to destroy my wedding day, and the urge would pass. They'd have to genuinely apologize first. I told Dan when he asked if I'd ever consider reconciling, and I don't think that's going to happen. Maya's wedding came and went. From what I heard, it was as over the top as expected, though many family members were conspicuously absent. My parents had spent a fortune they didn't have trying to give Maya her dream wedding, further straining their finances. 6 months after our wedding, Dan got a promotion at work. We celebrated by finally taking a weekend to assemble the furniture for our guest room. "Who do you think will be our first overnight guests?" Dan asked as we struggled with an IKEA dresser. I thought about it for a moment. Maybe someday my parents would come around. Maybe someday Maya would grow up and realize how childish she'd been. But I wasn't holding my breath. "Whoever it is," I said, "they'll be people who actually care about us." As we settled into our new home and our married life, I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood relations. It's about surrounding yourself with people who support you, respect you, and want the best for you. My parents and sister had chosen greed and pettiness over our relationship. It hurt, but I had made my peace with it. I had Dan, I had friends who stood by me, and I had extended family members who recognized the injustice of what had happened. Most importantly, I had stayed true to myself. I hadn't given in to their demands or their manipulation. The money from my fund had been used exactly as Dan and I had planned, to start our married life on solid financial footing. As I looked around our new apartment, at the life we were building together, I knew I had made the right choice. My wedding fund had bought us more than just a home. It had bought us independence, security, and the chance to build our future on our own terms. That was something I wouldn't trade for anything, not even for my family's approval.